The long-awaited moment is finally here. The true start of the Overwatch League playoffs begins this week. Here in Week 24 of the 2022 Overwatch League regular season, the play-ins for the APAC region will take place. Spark? Hunters? Or Charge? Who will claim the final spot in the East? And how will the play-ins and/or playoff picture take shape in the final week of regular season play here in the West? Let's get a little preview with some predictions going. Things have been wildly unpredictable as of late, so it should be really exciting. With it being the most important part of the weekend, we should probably start with the APAC Play-Ins. And it's over here that 3 teams will be competing in 2 matches on Saturday. The first of which is the Chengdu Hunters versus the Guangzhou Charge. Whoever wins this game will go on to play the Spark shortly after in the same day. And whoever wins that final showdown is going to punch their ticket to the playoffs. Needless to say, whoever wins this game has a long and exhausting road ahead of them. As for the matchup itself, it feels rather even on paper. In fact, these two played each other just a couple of weeks ago, and that one just barely went in the favor of Chengdu after a crazy 5-map series. However, it's worth noting that Chengdu have not won a match since that meeting. They finished the year on a 4-game losing streak and have consistently been outplayed. And on the other side of the coin, the Charge have won their last 3 and appear to be very focused. I mean, they look good. New players Piggy, Xerneas, and Jimmy have been making a major difference. This core, along with the consistency of Choi Se-won, has them maintaining the peak that we witnessed just one stage prior. Guangzhou have a lot more momentum and confidence coming their way, but if I've learned anything from the Countdown Cup so far, it's that you should always expect the unexpected. Don't count on the Charge to win this with relative ease. Chengdu are going to make this a good matchup, I just know it. The Chengdu zone can strike at any given moment no matter who you are, and they have last year's MVP on their team. Leave is not going to go down without a fight. It doesn't matter how the Chengdu Hunters have played as of late. All they really need is one good day to throw you off guard. They know this opponent very well and have the necessary countermeasures to stop them. They've done it once before in the same meta, and they can certainly do it again. However, when the dust settles, I do believe that the Charge will be the ones to survive in a 3-2 scoreline. I really do love the level of confidence they're playing with. Piggy looks very settled into his new role, and when it's all said and done, I just think he can make more of an impact since this meta is very Zarya and D.Va-centric. Additionally, I'm a major fan of how solid and flexible Xerneas has looked on both the main and flex support roles. The Charge seem to have the better standout players at this point in time. They have a slightly better idea of what they're doing and seem to have reliable playmakers across the board. It seems more and more like a Sombra off-tank meta is just a lot more in their favor, which is ultimately why I believe they will beat the Hunters this time. So let's say the Charge end up winning like I think. Well, that means they play the Spark in a winner-go-home showdown. And just like the Hunters, the Spark have not looked all that hot. Lots of really embarrassing L's and general confusion as of late. It seems like there's been a bit more cohesion in the last week or so with Teru and the DPS situation, but in general, that sample size that they're working with is not very big, so it does not warrant a lot of trust. Since making some small lineup adjustments, they played a good game against the Dynasty, who were technically already preparing for the playoffs on the newest patch, but still, a W is a W. But their other game was, you guessed it, against the Charge, where they got crushed. I'll be honest with y'all, with how they've played in the second half of this year, I do not trust in the Spark one bit. And it's not just because of how they've played here in the second half of the year, to be honest with you. I just generally have zero faith in their coaching. It's something I've talked about all year. Changun is just way too inconsistent and unreliable. He has his random magic that strikes from time to time, sure, but that magic might have already been used up during the mid-season madness. This won't be like that miracle run for Seoul in 2020 where the right meta came at the right time. We've already seen the Spark team play in this meta, and they're nothing special. When I watch the Spark play, I see a very uninspiring group. They get little boosts here and there, but it's generally really messy and all over the place. Between the Summer Showdown and the sudden lineup changes, the Spark have never been able to regain that balance they had. They might have the highest seed in the play-ins right now, but in my opinion, they are clearly the worst team in the mix. Both the Charge and the Hunters, really, have a much better idea of what they're doing. The Charge in particular have a more settled support line and multiple big names to play around. The Spark mostly play around Shy and occasionally Pineapple and Bernard. Guangzhou just have so many guys that can absolutely kill you, and when you factor in all their recent momentum, you'd expect them to come out on top. If the Charge are the ones to ultimately play the Spark, I believe they will win 3-1. I just can't put any trust in a Chang'un-led team. I really cannot do it. They've been so bad the last couple of months, and the Charge have been way better. I mean, it's a simple way of thinking, yes, but that's the truth. Oh, and if the Hunters were to advance instead, it's basically the same deal. I just have no faith in the Spark whatsoever right now. I'd be very surprised if they make it through this weekend in one piece. It's just so hard to believe in them after how hard they have collapsed since the middle of August, really. It's been nothing but pain, misery, and clear confusion, and they just genuinely don't feel like they deserve to be in the play-ins, and I much rather would have saw the Valiant. I'd say the Spark's chances of beating the Hunters are definitely a lot higher, since Chengdu are pretty mediocre and inconsistent as well, but I cannot get myself to commit to this Spark team. In the case that the Hunters and Spark play, I do see it going the distance, but in favor of Chengdu, as this is a hardened group that has already faced high-pressure situations in the past. The Spark really don't have that same level of experience with all of their players. And with how uncertain their future currently looks, I'd be foolish to pick them to win. It just does not seem like a good idea. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Overall, in the APAC play-ins, my number one guess would be that the Charge are the ones to make it through, but in the event that they do lose in round 1, I'm gonna pick Chengdu. But that basically concludes the APAC play-in portion of this video, so let me know what you think happens down in the comments below. But now we have to get into the other 8 games in North America. None of these matches are like do or die, so to speak, but a bunch of them could help determine the seeding at the very least, so let's dive right into it. First is the NYXL versus the London Spitfire. On paper, not a very exciting matchup, but the Spitfire do really need this one, as a convincing win would likely net them an automatic playoff spot. The Toronto Defiant are currently 1 point behind them in the standings, but London do have a +7 in that map differential department, so if they can manage a sweep against the NYXL, it's a done deal for sure. Now with that said, London need to go all out in this situation, no messing around. Based on what we've seen in recent weeks, a New York team with nothing to play for is pretty terrifying. They've pushed multiple playoff teams to their limits in this tournament so far, so counting them out would not be a smart idea. In general, London are going to be favored, they're the better team, but this could get out of hand, and it really comes down to how this meta has developed in recent weeks. Lots of D.Va and Zarya have been in the mix, which means we could end up seeing less Hottie, and he's a pretty important contributor to the London game plans, so that could affect them in a way. Additionally, a double flex support composition plays a lot up to the strengths of this NYXL team, as it means that people like Kingdom Jin can pop off even harder. The New York players definitely still have something to prove, even if they aren't making the playoffs. A lot of these guys are looking for job security, or at least the chance to get people to notice them, so maybe they can get a trial somewhere else if they're not on this team next year. So London have to keep a very sharp eye on their opponents, but I'd say that unfortunately for New York, it really won't matter if they try their best, because we've seen them play at their best a lot, and it usually is not enough, and that's going to be the case here too, because even if London slightly changed their approach, they're going to have everything they need to put the NYXL in their place for the simple fact that they have Shax on Tracer, you got Backbone's flexibility, Sparker Sojourn, and Khan playing like a madman recently. And honestly, let's not underestimate Poco in the case that London does end up playing him a lot. Poco has looked pretty solid the few occasions we've actually seen him play, and he's always been known as a pretty good D.Va and Zarya player. So if it comes down to a Zarya v Zarya or D.Va v D.Va, Poco is going to be very trustworthy in the clutch compared to somebody like Kellen. He just has the advantage as he's more experienced. So let's go with the Spitfire in a 4-map series. London just have the better grasp on the situation and more options in general on their roster, and that flexibility is going to play a major role in giving them a win over a New York team that has been far from perfect this year. Next we have what is unfortunately, most likely, a snoozer that needs absolutely no explanation for the answer. The Paris Eternal will be playing the San Francisco Shock. Do we really need to discuss this one? Paris are the worst team in the league, and yeah, while Shock haven't looked amazing in recent weeks, it's Paris, you know? And the Shock really do need this one as well. Expect them to come in and just get an easy sweep. They can't be messing around. A 2-0 week for the Shock would put them ahead of Seoul and the Gladiators most likely for the number 2 seed in the playoffs. And that is not an opportunity this team will let go to waste, as they need every single advantage they can get, and there's really no debating it. Next we have the Florida Mayhem taking on the Toronto Defiant, and this one has minor stakes for each side. Florida could still get as high as the number 7 seed with a little luck, and Toronto could still reach number 6 if London were to play poorly. A win could go a long way for each team in their efforts to make the playoffs this year. And truth be told, it could really go either way. Neither team looks all that great in the current meta. The Defiant literally lost to the Vancouver Titans, who almost lost to Paris, and they lost to New York. And Florida have been a real head-scratcher themselves, as they've been moving pieces around to different roles and have just been up and down, so I really don't know, man. I just don't find either team all that trustworthy currently. But I think I may like Toronto ever so slightly more. And yeah, I know that Florida technically have more motivation. They want to be the ones to get revenge for what happened in the tournament. And I know it's just going to sound really weird based off of how bad Toronto have looked at certain points, but they are simply a better Sombra team, and that's the big thing to take into account. Hisu is on his comfort pick, and Florida keep on shuffling around between Checkmate and Hydron, showing that they don't really have a true answer for this specific hero. I agree that Hydron on the Tracer is probably a great choice, but Checkmate is also really good on Tracer, so DPS feels a little out of whack at times, and Toronto kind of have it figured out, right? I'd say this match likely comes down to a few specific factors. One's going to be if Florida can keep pace with Hisu's dangerous Sombra, and the other's going to be if Toronto are able to outlast Florida in a double flex support meta. These are the main questions that decide the series, and if I had to pick between the Toronto supports keeping pace and Florida's DPS finding as much value as Hisu and Sombra, then catch me looking Toronto's way in a 5-map victory. Twilight and Chorong are just so damn talented. It's a bit more likely they play well enough on Zen Bap or Zen Ana compared to Checkmate on Sombra versus Hisu. This game in general might be a disaster since, again, both teams look pretty meh, but I say the Defiant are slightly more favorable. And speaking of favorable, we gotta talk about our next game when San Fran complete their European World Tour, so to speak, when they play the London Spitfire. The Shock definitely got a good draw to close out their season. No top tier opponents in sight right now, with a chance to grab that number 2 seed as well. London may not be easy when considering how poor the Shock have looked in the first couple of weeks, but Shock are still going to maintain the advantage and are going to be favored, as they tend to beat London with relative ease. And if anything, you probably are going to assume the Shock play a bit better now that the meta's starting to change and they've had time to relax and practice. I think that Kaluj is likely going to take the reins as the starting tank, which will be good since he's a solid Zarya and a good Diva player as well. And you'd also have to imagine that Striker's going to look more comfortable out there since he's had time to gel with his new teammates. So for that, I'll be taking the Shock in a 3-0 as they've had their time to rest, they had that big reverse sweep recently to give them more confidence, and there's just a lot at stake for them. They're better than London from a talent standpoint, and I think we'll see a much improved version of San Francisco this week. Proper and Kaluj lead the way. Next, you've got the NYXL versus the Boston Uprising, and the only real interesting note about this match is that it's the classic Boston versus New York sports rivalry. Aside from that, there are no implications on the playoff picture whatsoever, and there's just no real significance. New York are an interesting underdog, and Boston have had their ups and downs. Because this is the NYXL's final game of the year, maybe they'll end up balling out as Yaki and Flora end up going off to try and prove their worth during the offseason. But in general, Boston do have much better synergy and a slightly more explosive support line, and if we're being honest with ourselves, Punk is just a way more impactful tank player, both from a team and individual standpoint, especially in a meta such as this one where he's playing all of his best heroes. Part of me thinks that New York end up making this close because they have nothing to lose, but I'm gonna say that Boston fend off this upset in a 5-map series. Boston not only have more consistency at the tank and support positions, but they also should look more refined. They have to practice this meta very hard in preparation for the plans next week, and I expect that to reflect upon the final result. Anyway, the final Saturday slot belongs to Florida and Houston. Florida have potential positioning to play for here, and Houston have absolutely nothing. So if you ask me, Houston might not go all out as they possibly look to start practicing more on the newest patch in preparation for the playoffs. Because their roster is better, they're going to be favored for sure, but I kind of get this feeling they don't care all that much about beating Florida. There's nothing to gain from it. It's like in that Soul vs. Spark game. It only eats into their preparation for the more important part of this year. And hey, with Florida looking pretty decent at least against Atlanta, I kind of get the feeling they might end up winning. Houston fans will be rolling on the floor and calling me out for this, but I have the Mayhem in a 3-2 win. Listen, I get that Houston beat the Shock and Dallas recently, that's really great for them, but at this point they have nothing to gain from trying. And when you think about it, a very Houston thing to do would be to lose the game you actually expect them to win, you know? So why not? Florida do need this one a lot more, and there's a chance that it shows when it's all said and done. Now looking into Sunday, Boston start us off by playing Paris in the 3 p.m. slot, and I mean, I'm kind of a broken record at this point, so let's just get it over with. Paris bad, Boston decent, and need to play at least somewhat hard in preparation for the play-ins. Now listen, I get that Paris technically pushed Vancouver to a map 5, which is great for them, but Boston have been a way more competitive group compared to Vancouver in the Countdown Cup, and the likelihood of Paris putting on that kind of showcase again here in the final week just feels slim to me. So I'm gonna say that Boston take it in a 3-0, as they simply play way better around their tank and have a lot more firepower at the support position. They make the better decisions as a more experienced team, and that's all I really have to say as to how they get this W. And lastly, the final regular season game of the year features the Houston Outlaws and Toronto Defiant. And I know what you're gonna say. Surely Houston don't try in this one as well, right? Well, this is where I actually am going to flip the script on you. The Toronto Defiant are not a team they like very much after getting embarrassed by them in the Summer Showdown. And just something in my brain is telling me that Houston are going to go all out simply because they want revenge and nothing else. And when it's all said and done, I'm expecting them to cash in on said revenge in a somewhat convincing win. If Houston try, I think they're going to have this one, because if they can beat Dallas in the Shock, obviously they can beat Toronto if they go all out. And Houston have only really shown improvement as the meta has progressed, and the recent iteration of it seems like it's going to play up to a lot of their strengths, as Dante kind of does his thing up in front with Pelican, while Creative and Lastro have formed this new dynamic duo, so to speak, as they're both putting out some pretty explosive performances. Those two experienced veteran flex supports are going to put a lot of pressure on Chorong to match, and I just get this feeling he won't be able to since he's playing stuff outside of his natural position. So my pred is going to be a 3-1 for the Outlaws, as Houston definitely are going to want to win this. I just get this general feeling that loss in the tournament really stung. Revenge is most certainly on the horizon, and just imagine if Florida were to somehow beat Toronto earlier in the week. That's only going to get Houston's blood boiling even more. Their mouths are going to be watering at the opportunity. That opens up a world where Florida could maybe snag the 7th seed over them, and that could be a great way to serve up some revenge, as it only makes the Defiant's lives that much harder in an effort to make the playoffs. And that sounds like something that Junkbuck and the boys would be motivated to see happen. Revenge is a great motivator, ladies and gentlemen, and we could see it play out before our very eyes. But I guess we'll find out soon enough, huh? These next 2 weeks are going to be absolutely fire, as the play-ins are finally here, baby. Who do you think is going to punch their ticket from the APAC region this weekend? And what's the West going to be looking like? Tell me all of your thoughts down in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video and you want more Overwatch 2 and Overwatch esports content just like this, I would really appreciate it if you could like this video and subscribe to my channel. And until next time, this is ATP, signing out. Peace.